This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Hello and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times. The Byline Times is what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report, and what telly doesn't tell you. This time, Layla Micklethwait. Layla is a campaigner against sex trafficking on Pornhub, once the 10th most visited site on the internet and the most popular destination for adult content. The stats are mind-boggling. Pornhub had more daily visits than the entire populations of Canada, Australia, and France combined. It raked in hundreds of millions of dollars each year for its parent company MindGeek through advertising, but thanks to Layla's campaign, it ended up removing 80% of its content, including more than 10 million unverified videos. Layla took on the porn barons when she discovered that videos of rape, torture, and underage sex were being posted online. Layla, welcome to the Byline podcast. We met, I think, online 3 years ago, and your story has come a long way since then. Before we get into that, tell me a little bit about yourself, because when people hear your story, they might think that you're some kind of prude, that you've got something against porn per se. And as you've made clear in the book, that isn't you at all.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It's good to chat with you. It's been a while. But yeah, I mean, I am focused so specifically on sexual crime, on the monetization and the distribution of sexual crime, including trafficking, rape, child abuse, and really the spectrum of abuse, all kinds of non-consensual content. And that could include image-based sexual abuse, revenge porn, and all of that as well. But yeah, I come at it from a position of this is about crime, not pornography. And I think it's important to make a distinction there. Even victims are offended by calling what happened to them pornography, because pornography is legal material and what happened to them is crime. And so we don't even call child pornography that anymore. We call it child sexual abuse material because of that important distinction between those things. And so, yeah, as you mentioned in my book, I discuss my younger years growing up in Southern California. I was no enemy of the entertainment business, spent years in the Hollywood scene, all the way from partying at the Playboy Mansion to jumping on a bikini and Jimmy Kimmel's late night The Man Show. I was an acrobat and got accepted to Cirque du Soleil as a young teen as well. And I kind of joked that my dad didn't let me join the circus, thankfully. But come full circle to what I'm doing today, it's really very narrow and it's very focused on illegal content.
No, that's an important distinction, I think, and I just wanted to establish that right at the start. And what was the trigger for you for taking up the campaign?
Well, I have been investigating the intersection between what I call the big porn industry and sex trafficking and other forms of abuse for years before this began. And so my antennas were up. I was paying attention because we live in a digital world, and sex trafficking doesn't just happen in the dark alleys and places around the world where we would imagine that this is just happening offline, right? It's being filmed and it's being uploaded and monetized in a digital world. And so I understood that there was that kind of transition in the way that sex trafficking was manifesting and the way that traffickers were monetizing it. So I was paying attention. And at the end of 2019, there were some really horrific stories that were in the headlines that were catching my attention, really arresting my attention. There was a woman named Nicole Audimondo that had a particularly horrifying story of being sexually tortured, assaulted, and those assaults being filmed and uploaded to Pornhub. And she actually ended up killing her abuser. and she was sentenced to life in prison, separated from her 2 young children, kind of the same ages or even a little bit older than mine at the time. But I identified with her as the mother of 2 children that was separated because of what happened. And then there was an investigation in the London Sunday Times at the same time that had found dozens of illegal videos on the site within minutes, even children as young as 3 years old. And in that investigation, they had identified and reported on over 100 instances of child abuse. And they said that most of them were, I'd say half of them actually were category A level abuse, which is the worst kind of abuse. And to me, as a mother of 2, and at the time I had a 3-month-old baby that was a very sad baby, crying at all hours of the day and night because he had had a birth complication. And I was up late one night trying to get my inconsolable baby back to bed and thinking about these stories that I had just read about. Another in particular that was really horrific to me was the story of a 15-year-old from Broward County, Florida, who had been missing for an entire year. And she was finally found when her mother was tipped off by a Pornhub user that he had recognized her daughter on the site. And this mother located her daughter under an account named Daddy Slut, and she was being raped and abused in 58 videos. And not only were they being monetized with ads all around the videos, but they were being sold as pay to download content, where Pornhub was taking a cut of the sale of each of this child's rape. They were able to match the abuser's face with surveillance footage from a 7-Eleven. They were able to rescue her from his apartment, and she had been impregnated by him as well. And I was thinking about that story, and a question came to mind. How in the world did this abuse end up on the world's most popular porn site? Because at the time, jokes on Saturday Night Live, pop-up shops in New York Fashion Week, people are wearing their apparel proudly in public, and they are the mainstream household name for porn. And so I had an idea. I said, I'm going to test the upload system for myself. And I found out what millions of people already knew, because at that time they were getting 6.8 million videos uploaded every year. And it was that they just hadn't required an email address to upload. So no ID to make sure this is not a child, no consent form to make sure it's not a rape or trafficking victim. Literally anonymously in minutes, anybody in the world with an iPhone, because this is the YouTube of porn where anyone can become a pornographer, could upload a sex act, upload it online anonymously with only an email address. And that's how the site became completely infested with videos of real sexual crime. And that's how Trafficking Hub movement began, is when I made that discovery and I said, oh my goodness, the servers of Pornhub and its parent company could potentially be the largest collection of sexual crime in existence. So that's when Trafficking Hub began. I said, I have to sound the alarm on what's going on.
Yeah, and you established that the age verification process, the verification process in total, was a sham, really.
Well, so anybody could upload, right, without having this like blue check mark verification by your name that makes those who are visiting the site think that you are a verified professional porn performer because you have that blue verification check mark badge that we all know about, right, on social media. This is verification. And at the time, all they required was a username and a photo to get that verification. No ID, no age, no consent, nothing. It was a total sham, as you said, to get verified on Pornhub at the time. But you didn't need to be verified to upload. I mean, anybody could literally anonymously, using a VPN to even be more anonymous, could upload to the site.
And you reached out to journalists you knew. I think, was it the Washington Examiner that featured the first story? And you were contacted by moderators on Pornhub, people whose job it was to check for illegal content. What did they tell you?
Yeah. So as this began to catch on social media, I started the hashtag Trafficking Hub. And then I realized I've got to get this farther than just my few thousand followers on Twitter. And so I wrote an op-ed about my findings and all of these stories I'm telling you about. I sent it into multiple outlets. The one that accepted it was called the Washington Examiner. And then that produced more outrage and more traction. And then I was contacted by a follower with an idea to start a petition. And they said, start a petition or I will. And I said, okay, I'll do it. I copied and pasted my op-ed into a change.org petition and it went viral instantly. Today we have 2.3 million signatures from every country in the world. but it just took off. And as that was going viral across social media, I was being contacted by victims almost on a daily basis or even multiple times a day in some cases, and company whistleblowers, insiders from the company who worked in various departments. But the most interesting to me, well, there were a lot of really important information that came forward, but were the moderators who were in Cyprus, who were supposedly moderating this content, is what Pornhub was telling the world. But what they revealed was horrific in that they had only 10 moderators in Cyprus. Now let's, per shift, 30 total, right? And this is not just to look at content from Pornhub, but all of MindGeek's PornTube sites. So MindGeek, the parent company of Pornhub, owns a monopoly on the global porn industry, and they own most of the world's most popular PornTube sites, as well as production studios and all of that. So they were in charge, these 10 people, of moderating content from Pornhub, YouPorn, RedTube, Tube8, ExtremeTube, Gate. I mean, you name it. There were so many tubes. And they told me, and they showed me internal documents. I had schedules, I had names, I had phone numbers, I had the lack of rules, right? And they told me they were reprimanded if they watched less than 700 videos per shift, but they were expected to at least do 1,200 per 8-hour shift. And some of the more experienced moderators were just clicking through up to 2,000 videos per shift with the sound off. They said to me, I know people who let very underage content go through, and they said, our job is not to keep illegal content off the site. Our job is to let as much content go through as possible, because that's the way that Pornhub makes money, is by selling 4.6 billion ad impressions on massive amounts of content. And without that content, they can't sell those ad impressions. And so that's the way the system worked. And that was revealed.
Yeah, one little detail that jumped out at me when you were talking about the moderators was that they might know English, they might know Spanish, but they didn't have a command of languages around the world, even though content was being uploaded from around the world. So if somebody, for example, in India was crying rape in Urdu, they would have no idea that they were crying rape.
If they even had the sound on, right? Because most of it was the sound off. But even in the titles and the tags, I mean, there were so many instances that we documented where the actual title of the video was rape, but it was in Chinese or it was in a different language. And they didn't check. Like, they didn't even take the time to put that in Google Translate to find out what the title says that the video contains. Not only that, they were just guessing. Like, they said that this is basically a guessing game when it comes to age and it comes to consent, because as a policy, they intentionally were not verifying ID, age, and consent, but the moderators had to literally guess what is rape and what's rough sex. Who is 16 and who's 18? One is a felony crime, one is legal. And they were having just like these random ways that they were trying to do this. Like, he was mentioning, well, I could look at whether they were wearing nail polish or not. And maybe that could indicate something to me. And I'm thinking, well, I put nail polish on my 3-year-old daughter, asked me to put nail polish on. Like, that is not a way to, indicate whether this is a child. Things like that were revealed, the details, what I call the deep complicity of Pornhub and its owners in what was happening are revealed in detail.
Can you remember the first time you met a victim of trafficking or of underage sex whose video had been posted on Pornhub?
Gosh, the first time, there's been so many now, I mean, hundreds. I don't specifically remember the particular first, but it would be where a victim would often reach out on social media, because this was very much happening on social media, particularly Twitter. And they would reach out in a DM and say, I saw the petition, or please, can you help me get a video down of my rape? It's on Pornhub right now and I can't get it down. And they would be reaching out in desperation. And I didn't realize this at the time because I understood this statistic later, but I felt like the urgency of the moment, that every moment on Pornhub, for these victims to have their abuse up there was a moment too long, because they had 5 million visitors on the site per hour. And as a policy, they made a decision to put a download button on every single video so that they could be transferred from MindGeek servers to these individuals around the world and then be re-uploaded to Pornhub and to the rest of the internet forever for the rest of these victims' lives. And so for victims, there was urgency. The suicidal ideation we know now of victims of this type of abuse is upwards of 50%. 50% consider suicide. Many of them attempt suicide. So sadly, some of them actually do die by suicide because of this. But the feeling that was there as these victims were reaching out in desperation in many cases to try to get these videos down, and it happened again and again and again and again.
Yeah, and I think we can't emphasize enough that this wasn't a case of one video somehow slipping through the net. This was a deep systemic problem with Pornhub, one which was flagged up to the people who ran MindGeek, the company behind Pornhub, and whose response appeared to be a shrug of the shoulders, essentially, certainly in the early days. In fact, quite early on, there were admissions in their statements when journalists or you got in touch with them, which kind of accepted that this kind of content was on their site.
Yeah, I remember one particularly early statement. I think it was in response to the London Sunday Times article, and they used some tricky language. They said, oftentimes, this material is legal and consensual, meant to cater to various user fantasies. And they're talking about underage appearing videos. So basically, they were saying, well, don't worry, these are pretend. This is 18-year-olds pretending to be 15, but they use the word oftentimes. Well, and oftentimes they're not, right?
And
They
there was
also,
a phrase, wasn't there, when they, I think one of the early responses said less than 1%.
right. Then they
videos.
started to try to make calculations to
Yeah.
minimize what was happening, which was actually really not in their favor, because they started to say, well, less than 1% of this site is sexual crime or child abuse. So I said, let's do the calculation. So that would mean if you have 42 million images on your site and you have almost 11 million videos right now, 1% of that would be okay. So their defense statements, including a defense statement that they said, every single video is reviewed by a vast and extensive team of human moderators before it goes online. Well, we found out the vast and extensive team was actually 10 working per shift. Compare that to Facebook's 15,000, and they don't have enough moderators. But they said they were reviewing every single video, which is a statement of absolute complicity, because what that means is that we have confirmed cases of toddlers, of 3-year-olds, of 12-year-olds. I mean, think about this. There's a 12-year-old boy from Alabama who was drugged, overpowered, and raped by a man named Rocky Shea Franklin, who's in prison for 40 years for what he did. And he filmed 23 of those rape videos and uploaded them to Pornhub. And he was selling them as pay-to-download content in a profit-sharing relationship with Pornhub. Pornhub was getting 35% of the sale of the child's rape, and he was getting 65%. And what Pornhub was essentially saying is our moderators viewed and approved 23 of that child's rape videos, and the titles of those videos included phrases indicating illegality. And I won't say the more explicit terms, but it was clear, even from the descriptions, that they're illegal. So in the sense that they are then admitting their deep responsibility for doing this intentionally, right? And you think about intention, and they were admitting that.
There's a chapter called The Zuckerberg of Porn, where you meet Fabian Tillman, a classic kind of bedroom geek, wasn't he? He was into coding early. He understood the internet before anybody did. He had an interest in porn, and he was the mastermind behind the idea of user-generated pornography and this global network of free-to-view porn. Tell me about him and the people then who subsequently succeeded him, and what has happened now, given the extent of the illegality on this site that you uncovered.
Yeah. So we dive in to understand who was the Zuckerberg of porn. And he really put Pornhub on the map with his vision, from an early age of getting free porn into the hands of everybody in the entire world. Because he, as a young boy wanted that. And it was at a time when you had to use a credit card to pay for porn. And I say that his vision for free porn came at a steep cost, but he's the one that put this company on the map. He rolled up the porn industry with a $362 million loan from Colbeck Capital that had secret investors, including Cornell University and JP Morgan and others. And he bought up the porn industry, both the paid sites and the free sites. So the tube sites plus the production studios and brands. And he became the Zuckerberg of porn. And he got in trouble. So he ended up getting arrested for tax evasion. He had to quickly sell the company. He sold it to some VPs and a secret shareholder, which nobody knew who that secret shareholder was for years until he was found, uncovered, and now is being held accountable through the story that's told in the book. His name is Bernd Bergmair. But he sold the company, they renamed it. So first it was Mansef, then it was Manwin, then it became MindGeek. And then when MindGeek got in trouble with all of this that happened, now they've sold the company. The CEO and the COO were forced to resign. David Tasillo and Faraz Antoun, who you really get to know in this book, thanks to dozens of hours with very close insiders, family insiders, and company insiders who reveal intimate details about these executives and the way that they ran not only their company, but their personal business ventures and their family life. And then they ended up selling again now. So now there's a new company. So MindGeek doesn't exist. They renamed it to a company called ILO, and they've sold it to a hastily concocted private equity firm in Canada called Ethical Capital Partners. And today they are running Pornhub, and the site is still awash with illegal content. Pornhub went from 56 million pieces of content when this started to 5.2 today. So they've lost 91% of their content. They had to flush down the toilet because it was infested with videos of crime. But they're still distributing unverified content, meaning the people in the videos were not verified for age and consent. So there's still some work to do there. And the new owners have to now also be held accountable for what's going on.
But have any charges been brought against people who were complicit by hosting the site?
So we have victims who, I'll talk about the civil side and the criminal side. So this fight for justice is still ongoing. Nearly 300 victims have sued in 25 lawsuits across the US, the UK, and Canada, including multiple class actions on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims. And criminal charges in the US were brought against the company. So charges were filed by the US federal government, Eastern District of New York, charging them with the crime of knowingly profiting from the sex trafficking of a particular set of victims out of California. There was 100 women who were victimized by a trafficking operation there. However, the US government ended up offering what's called a deferred prosecution agreement, where they fined them $1.8 million. And they put a government monitor over their site. And they said, if you behave for the next 3 years, we will not go forward with our prosecution. So we're in the midst of that, which is some measure of justice, but it's just not enough. I mean, $1.8 million is nothing to this company. So we need to see real full criminal prosecution on behalf of all of the victims that have been, children and all the adults around the world, not only in the US, but in Canada, where they violated the law there, in the UK, in other countries around the world. We have yet to see it, and we will see it. And I hope that this book is going to be something that puts the spotlight on them like never before. I feel like, in some ways, this book is the indictment that the government hasn't produced and needs to in order for justice to be served. And so victims can have healing, they can have closure for what happened, and also to be a deterrent to future abusers. Because without that, this is a risk-benefit calculation for these corporate traffickers. And until the risk of continued exploitation is greater than the benefits they get by maintaining the status quo, they will not stop. And it's not just Pornhub, but it's other websites that are distributing this content as well.
So for you, Layla, the book's out, Takedown by a Penguin, Random House. Your battle continues.
Yes, the battle continues on, and hopefully this will inspire many more people to join the fight.
Really great to speak to you again, Layla, and just congratulations. Just an amazing fight. You galvanized millions of people around the world, and it's a grassroots campaign, I suppose, and as well as showing the dangers, the poisonous effects of the internet, you've also been able to mobilize people through the internet as well, and in that sense show the positive side of online activity.
Well, thank you for caring about this story, not just today, but in the past as well. And I appreciate that because it really is a collaborative effort to shine a light on injustice. And that's one thing that I love about this story. It's not a one woman's battle. Really, it's been the work of amazing journalists who've covered this, lawyers who stepped into the fight. Obviously, most important, the courageous survivors who have come forward, but even, businessmen and people in the porn industry who've become some of the greatest allies in this fight is just, I think, a beautiful display of what can happen when people come together for something that we can all agree needs to change.
The book is called Takedown. That's Layla, Laila Mickleweight. Do check it out. It's a great read. We've only scratched the surface in this conversation. Just to remind you as well before we go that the Byline podcast comes out as part of Byline Audio. We've got some fantastic offerings. We've got Adventures in Americana with Bonnie Greer and Hardeep Matharu, the editor of the Byline Times. We've also got the very funny and the very informative Utter Bollocks with Otto English and John Mitchinson. So make sure you don't miss out. Check out bylineaudio.com. And if you're willing to pay for the premium version, you get extra audio content and an ad-free version of this podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head over to bylineaudio.com. My thanks to Layla. Thanks to you for listening. We'll see you again very soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.